Welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast. I'm Melissa Durrell, your host. Our theme, our mission, our vision is making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. This is episode 4. It's titled Telling Indigenous Stories. And I'm super excited because today we have Tasha Hubbard joining us, and I'm just going to take her off of here. Hi, Tasha.
Hello.
So I'm going to introduce you a little bit here. You're an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and an assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan, my home province, in the Department of English. She's from Peepeekisis. Say it for me.
Peepeekisis.
There it is. First Nations Treaty for Territory. She also recently premiered an NFB-produced feature documentary called Birth of a Family, which I saw. It's so great. All of our viewers can watch it too. We'll tell you how in a couple minutes. It's about the 60s scoop family reunited for the first time, which landed in the top 10 audience choice list at the year's Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Film Festival, and it just won the Zonta Film Festival People's Choice Award. Yeah. Tasha does research on Indigenous film and is appointed to the National Film Board's newly formed Indigenous Advisory Council. Tasha, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
So, I love this idea of Indigenous culture is all about storytelling. And here you are telling amazing stories about your people. And I see your daughter in the background, which is amazing.
It's my son.
Oh, your son. Sorry, he kind of flew through there.
I know.
But I love this idea of, I think it's so important that our Indigenous Canadians are telling stories, right? Mm-hmm. So how did you, tell me a little bit about Birth of a Family and how you started it?
Yeah, so I had met Betty Ann Adam, who's a journalist from Saskatoon, during the making of my first film, Two Worlds Colliding. And we had kept in touch over the years, and I moved back to Saskatoon a few years ago, and I had told her one time, if you ever want to make a film, like, come talk to me, I can help you get started. And so she came to me in the spring of 2015, telling me about this amazing moment that was going to happen, that she had spent all this time looking for her siblings. They'd all been adopted or fostered, and she was going to bring them together for this week. And I was trying to not take on projects because I was finishing my PhD dissertation, and I promised my supervisor I would not do anything but that.
Yeah.
So we actually started talking about her directing, but after a while it just, she was like, this is a big thing to take on. I've never made a film before, and she knew how intense it was going to be for her to have this moment. So it just kind of worked organically, and I just realized, this is a really amazing story. And I felt like I often ask myself, am I the right person to tell this story when certain stories come my way? And I felt with this one that I'd understood what they were going through, and that I thought, I can tell this story well. So I did it. Yeah.
And she's such a great, I can't imagine if she was behind the camera, because she's so well spoken, and she has some of the best analysis in the film, I think. When she come on, and for those people who haven't had the chance to watch it, tell us a little bit about the story.
Yeah, so she spent decades looking for her siblings. There's herself and 3 younger siblings. She's the oldest. And she applied for her mother's common experience payment through the residential school settlement. Her mother passed away, so she kept the money in trust and used that to bring them all to a cabin in the mountains in Banff from where they were living. So Esther was living in California, Rose is living in BC, and Ben is living in Alberta, and she's in Saskatchewan. So they all had to take a plane and get off the plane at the airport, and one by one meet. And then there's that moment where they're all together, and we just follow them through that week together with our cameras.
As they become a family.
Yeah.
What was your favorite moment about when you were filming? Was there a moment that either warms your heart or gives you goosebumps when you think back to it?
Really, it was that first airport meeting, because we had so many people watching with us, because of course there's a camera crew in the airport and everyone's like, what's this about? And who are these people? And so my producer, Bonnie Thompson, who's with the National Film Board, you know, we would be telling people, well, this is what's happening. And it was so amazing to watch people like stop their day to just stand and wait, because we were waiting for the last sibling to come.
Yeah.
And it was Esther coming from the States. And so, you know, you see her coming through the glass, and they have this moment, and, you know, they're hugging, and there's just so much joy. And, you know, bystanders who have never seen these people before are crying.
Sobbing, yeah.
Yeah, because everyone just could feel, you know, we could feel how important that moment was.
And I think that's one of the things I want to talk to you about today, because, I mean, how much of Canada do you think really understands what the 60 Scoop is?
Yeah, I don't think that many. I think we're at a place now, you know, because there's been lots of, you know, more and more stories told, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's done their work. You know, there's been films and books and whatnot. People have a pretty good sense of residential schools.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case with the 60 Scoop. You know, even when we were first screening the film, you know, people were like, well, what is that? Like, I've never heard of that. And, you know, we're seeing that it's, you know, it's sometimes the first time people have heard of this. So, you know, I think we're just starting. This film is one family story, but there's thousands of families that went through this.
Yeah. And I think, and so for Indigenous people, how important is it for the rest of, for them to tell this story, do you think?
I think it's really important. I think, you know, sadly, a lot of times Indigenous people are told again and again, get over it, move on. You know, let's not go there. Let's not. And when you're
really,
whole life,
is that really what's being said? Get over it, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so keep going.
So, you know, when you can see how your family and how your communities have been so impacted, you know, by policies, by the Indian Act, by residential schools, by the 60s, like child welfare, you know, that's really difficult to hear, you know, and I think we're just, you know, there's a lot of focus right now around reconciliation and reconciliation efforts. And, you know, one of my friends said it really well. She said, you know, we haven't even gotten to the truth.
Yeah.
It's truth and reconciliation. And we're trying to go to reconciliation right away, and we're still grappling with the truth. And so, you know, I think as an academic too, I think about that. Like, there's so many stories of the details that we don't know. And even with something like residential school, like we're just hearing now about medical experiments done on kids and nutrition experiments and, you know, all of these things. So the details are still to come out, and some of those are painful. And that's the same case with the 60 Scoop. I mean, you know, some of the people who went through this were not cared for, you know, we're not loved. We're taught to feel shame in who they are. You know, we're abused physically and emotionally in other ways. And that has its legacy. You know, there's estimates of like the vast majority of Indigenous people in corrections who are incarcerated have been through the child welfare system. You know, to go through that, you know, it's almost too much, you know, to grapple with. So, you know, I think we're just starting, and sometimes they're hard to hear, some of these stories, but I think that you know, in order to truly, you know, move together as a you know, as a country, those stories have to be listened to.
I 100% agree. And I grew up in Saskatchewan, and it's, you know, I often tell people it's such an important part of that province. And then when I moved to Ontario, you know, there isn't that same kind of, the Indigenous culture is just not around on a daily basis here. And so it was like, I remember, and I tell this story all the time, I remember being a young girl, and we would go to fields fields that had just been tilled, and we would get Indian arrowheads. That's what the arrowheads, and the rocks that were shaped like hammerheads from the battles, like from around North Battleford, and we'd learn about what happened in those battles. And I would tell my Ontario friends, and they had no idea. But also too, it occurs to me now as an older adult, we were picking up, I mean, architecturally, like sorry, not architect, but like do you know what I mean? Like these are significant.
Indigenous heritage. Yeah.
That's right. And yet here we were, a bunch of kids picking them up in a tilled field. So it's really, I mean, there's so much that our country has to still learn about Indigenous people and what they went through. And I think telling films is such an important part of it. And this is what you're studying. So, talk to me a little bit about what that means for people. How can they learn more?
Yeah, I think it is on a basic level, and this is what I often tell people is, most Indigenous people I know who are working in film or who are working in education, we have our projects and our research that we're trying to work on to get out into the world. And a lot of times people will come to us, well, tell me about this. Well, I've never heard about that. Tell me about it. And I'm always like, actually you should start with some reading, right? Start with some educating. And then if you have questions about something specific, come and ask me, right? Yeah. But I feel like that's a big step is educating and looking for historic texts and even contemporary literature and whatnot, and films that are made by Indigenous people. Right? That are written by, because there's some pretty good stuff out there for sure from, non-Indigenous writers and filmmakers, but really it's time, I think, to read and listen and watch, content made by Indigenous creative people. And so that's my first suggestion is go to the Indigenous section in your bookstore. Yeah. If there isn't one, ask them, how come you don't have an Indigenous section in your bookstore? Yeah, right. Seek out Indigenous films. There's films there's festivals across the country that are Indigenous film festivals. Yeah. Everybody's welcome.
So your film is amazing. And we had another film at the Zonta Film Festival called The Road Forward. And did you say you sat on a panel with the director of that film too? Is that?
Yeah, I'm actually bringing that film to my university next month. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah.
And I love it. The music in it is amazing. Amazing. It's incredible. And so there are some great films and they're accessible, right? So your film is actually going to be shown on CBC, is that correct?
Yeah, the film is produced by the NFB. So education institutions, etc., can see it online, but we also managed to get a national CBC broadcast. So that's on Sunday, on November 19th at 9 p.m. It's a shorter version of the film. So the film that's at the festivals and that's up online with the NFB is almost 80 minutes. And then we cut down to a 44-minute version for...
Ooh, how did you do that? What did you cut out?
We didn't cut anything major. We just shortened everything.
Yeah? Was that hard to do?
It was easier than I thought it was going to be. Really hard. And we set aside this past summer, like, we're going to need this much time. But it actually went pretty quick, and I'm happy with it. The heart of the film is still there. Just some of the details aren't. And some of the nice quiet moments we had to lose. But
right.
But it's it's still the same story, and I'm happy with it. So yeah, that's exciting that it'll be on CBC.
I can't wait, and we'll push it out on all of our channels too.
Sure. Thank you.
So I just wanted to go back to the 60 Scoop, and one of the things that one of the questions that someone wanted to ask me to ask you was Chief Marcia Martel described what happened to her and thousands of others and she did this in the Canadian press, as a cultural genocide, saying, I lost everything, including my name. I lost my family. I lost my language. I lost everything about my culture. And I'm wondering, you as a filmmaker in an interesting space, because you're telling the stories, but you're also an Indigenous woman. And so how do you live in both of those places, or is it the same for you?
Well, I think sometimes people get uncomfortable with the word genocide, but it really explains the destruction of a people.
Yeah.
Right? It's the different ways in which a people who are a group are attacked and destroyed. And so residential schools, 60s Scoop, one of the definitions of genocide is the removal of children, right? So that's definitely the case. And it does. I mean, I don't speak my language. My dad is a fluent Cree speaker.
Yeah.
And, I take Cree classes and I try to learn, but it's hard,
It's a hard language. Is your son learning it? I'm curious.
Yeah, he does. We went to Cree camp together this summer, and
cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's picking it up easier and faster than I am. That's for sure. So, but I'm also someone who found my way back when I was 16, so I've had a lot of time to reconnect. So yeah, I think that it's, and I will say this too, that I started making films because I realized how little I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking culturally or ceremonially, like that's my own personal journey, but just on a level of knowing the history, knowing the issues that we currently have. Indigenous people are not in the past, we're very much in the present. Realizing how many gaps I had just from my basic, curriculum that I took in school, and how little I saw Indigenous people in the media and in literature. Right. And when I did see them, they were stereotypes or caricatures, right? Mm-hmm. So when I was in my 20s, I met the late Gil Cardinal, who's a documentary filmmaker, and I met Tantu Cardinal, who's an actor. Mm-hmm. And I just started to think about film, and I thought, I could work and help make films and learn, really learn about my history and my culture at the same time. And that was the appeal. And so when I'm making my films, a lot of times I don't know the answer. I don't know what's going to be said, which is why I like documentary. They're really exploratory. And so I just make my films bring the audience along on this journey of reconnecting and learning and discovering. Sometimes it's discovering hard truths. My first film was about the police taking Indigenous men outside of the city in the wintertime. Hard truths that were discovered in that film. And I had to come to terms with the idea of police as a place of safety. That's what I was taught as a kid. Mm-hmm. Idealizing the RCMP in a musical ride, and they always get their man, to this other side of police abusing their power and Indigenous people being at the brunt of that. So, in that case, it was this one. And with this one too, I didn't know what the family was going to experience during that week. I had ideas and I knew what I'd gone through, but ultimately, I just felt honored to be invited along, and and brought, okay, I'm going to bring the audience with me. And that's how I think about the work I do.
So it's interesting to me. Are you mentoring any young Indigenous filmmakers now?
Yeah. Some young, some not. I think, but yeah, I try to incorporate that in, especially now that I am a little more established, having both formal and informal mentorship built into my film structures. This one was a bit tough because we were on location and it was a, intense shoot. We were 5 days on the road visiting the siblings, and then a week in Banff, up in the mountains kind of thing. Yeah. But when we got back, we edited in Saskatoon, and the editor came here to stay, partly because with my son, I can't go live in Toronto or Vancouver for 6 weeks to edit. But we had an open policy where, you know, I invited people like that I knew who were filmmakers, come and sit and watch us edit, come ask questions. So one young filmmaker did. She took it up, and she came and sat, and we actually took the whole day to just explain to her what we were doing and how we went about it. And, you know, the editor gave her some tricks because she's editing too. And,
Right on.
you know, so now with my new film, we actually have that built in as someone who will get paid to be an apprentice editor, you know, and, you know, I have other filmmakers that will, you know, I'll come along, and most of the time I try and pay them. And sometimes it's like, I can't, you know, I don't have a lot of money, but I'll take care of you for this day if you want to come and see what I do, you know? So yeah, I really believe that. That's how I learned, was people mentoring me. So definitely try and pay it forward.
I love it. What's the next story you're going to tell?
It's a tough one. It's on the prairies as well. And I'm going to look at the situation we see ourselves in now in Saskatchewan around the shooting death of Colton Boushie, who was a young Indigenous man killed last year. And the person who killed him was a farmer, and he's on trial for second-degree murder, which starts in the new year. Mm-hmm. And so I'm basically, you know, a lot of what came out of that incident online was a lot of racism, a lot of harsh comments around Indigenous people. And so I'm just going to try and make sense of that. Where do people get their ideas about Indigenous people? Mm-hmm. You know, we have a lot of stereotypes that we're carrying, and where do those come from, you know? So it's just, again, trying to make sense of all of that, you know, but also as a mother, you know, as a mother of a child, and wanting things to be different when he's an adult, wanting there to be, you know, a collaborative future. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You when you talk about racism, one of the things that I often tell people, and you know, is that by 2050, half the population of Saskatchewan will be Indigenous. And that's a really important statistic, I think. Mm-hmm. But as we look across the country, it's a little bit more scattered, right? And a bit more rural. And so I wonder, you know, and this is the Canadian question, really, right? Is around racism, and I think, you know, telling stories and really hitting it hard in the face is how you get, you know, you make people uncomfortable. And is that kind of, I know the story with the you mentioned the two young Indigenous men who were driven out of the city limits of Saskatoon, and they were left to walk back into the city limits, and they froze to death. And that was I remember being in Saskatchewan, and it was very difficult because it was unbelievable that actually happened. Mm-hmm. And I just think, but there's those things continue to happen, and it makes me so angry, and I can't even imagine that we're still dealing with this. Mm-hmm. I guess.
It's woven into the fabric of the country, and that's the hard part, right? Yeah. It's been like that, you know, in the sense of Indigenous peoples being seen as being needed to clear away and move. And, you know, I grew up with, you know, my dad, when I met him when I was 16, you know, he taught me about the treaties, you know, and what the treaties were supposed to be, right? What we agreed to is this sense of sharing, this sense of a relationship with the newcomers, right? Mm-hmm. And what we agreed to didn't end up on the page,
right?
You know, and so the version that's on the page is not what people agreed to, right? Yeah. So my big question's always been like, you know, where did that go wrong? And, you know, you can start with the Indian Act, but I think it's attitudes that people had at the time. And so, you know, I'm always really curious when people don't have those attitudes. It's like, how did you get to that point? Yeah. Right? How did you make that decision to look at the big picture and learn their history and try to understand more? because I think a lot of people haven't done that yet, right? So I'm always fascinated by people who go, you know what, I had a turning point when I was this age, and I started to really think about where I live, and why people say things about and I guess so that's kind of where I'm at right now. With it's early days for the project, but I just at the end of the day want I want things to be better for the ones coming behind, the little ones.
Do you feel like we're in that turning point space? I mean, with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it feels, and I hate to be the one to say it, because I have no idea. I fully admit it. I have no clue. But I feel like I'm talking about Indigenous people way more than I had in the past. And but I don't know, is that just because I'm getting more,
the visibility is increasing for sure, right? For many, many years, Indigenous people are out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But they're always been there. And, I think Canadians need to remember too that, for many years under the Indian Act, it was illegal for Indigenous people to hire a lawyer. It was illegal for them to organize politically. It was, illegal to leave the reserve without permission. Right. If you got an education, you were automatically, you had your status taken from you. So plus then add all of that to the abuses in the residential school, the removal from the land, all of these things, and even worse, atrocities that are other people are telling those stories. So, we're still in a period of recovery, right? My dad got a law degree. I think he was the second Cree person to get a law degree, and he's just the generation before me.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we're at a point where the second generation, that first generation did so much. Those ones that, okay, we're going to do these things.
Yeah.
So, and then that to say, there's people who have always been pushing for change for the last 150 years. I've read letters that chiefs wrote and sent to Ottawa saying, hey, things aren't good here. We're not getting what you said we're going to get. Yeah. I'm responsible for all these people, like, hello over here, and I'm totally paraphrasing, but you know what I mean? Those were and, did those letters get read? Did they just get filed in file 13? So people have been advocating for a long time, for a really long time. It's just, we're finding lots of different ways to be heard. And I think we're shifting into a period of increased visibility, but also increased, what's the word I'm looking for? I think sometimes people can come down hard too, right? And so, you look at journalism and the fact that look at the comments that people make after a story.
Yeah, that's the gross part, isn't it?
People, right? So, we're more visible and we're more vocal, but we're also,
more vulnerable.
More vulnerable. Yeah, there's some definite. So, I guess for me as a filmmaker, I just try and find a way of telling these stories that sometimes move around people's defenses or give something unexpected, and just do my part, do my part.
Well, you're an incredibly talented filmmaker, and I love your film, Birth of a Family, and I look forward to the next film. I guess you'll be shooting it as the trial is on.
Yeah, we start.
Yeah.
Can
we follow on a blog or anything?
No, I learned from someone, I don't like talking, and I haven't talked about it very much, and for me, it's just better to stay grounded in my head and learning and thinking and putting it in, and then when it's done is kind of when I I'm ready to be in the world with it. Awesome. So no, I'll So I haven't talked about it very much. You're one of the few people I've been talking to.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's going to be a fascinating film and an important story to tell. And, you know, if part of your mission is to sort of shake people's ideas and stereotypes up, then you keep doing what you're doing, Tasha, because you're amazing. So thank you for coming on our podcast. Tasha Hubbard, and you can watch her on CBC. The film is called Birth of a Family. It's an incredible film. I highly recommend it. And thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to everyone who has tuned in to listen. Hey, your comments are welcomed and encouraged. And please subscribe to the Women's March Canada channel, because you'll receive an update every time we upload a new podcast. Our mission across Canada is to stand together in solidarity with our partners and our children for the protection of our rights, our safety, our health, and our families, recognizing that a vibrant and diverse community are the strength of our country. This is the Women's March Canada podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Women's March CDA, on our website at womensmarchcanada.com. I'm Melissa Durrell. Have a great day. Thanks.